Dave's comment was, "You can only mess it up from here, Amanda." No pressure. No pressure. Well done. I can't give a high five from here, but like spiritually, I'm sending you a high five. That's fantastic. We're just so overwhelmingly blessed here. I'm amazed week after week. We continue with the same scripture we've been looking at all month long, kind of as our theme for stewardship and for loving God and loving our church. So let's hear it one more time from Matthew 22. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." As I said, we've been studying and preaching on this passage for several weeks as a part of our stewardship campaign. We've talked about and written down ways that we have shared our time, our talents, and our tithes or treasures with God over the past year in order to think about how and what we're going to share with God and with our church this next year. And Jesus' last statement when answering the lawyer's question reveals the final way to love God, which is what we've been looking at, and how to follow God's law. And that is to love your neighbor as yourself. I learned watching, of all things, a YouTube video this week about the last 25 years as a planet and as a world, we've actually gotten better at this, amazingly enough. That when we look at the United Nations Millennial Development Goals, which sounds very fancy, but just ways to make the planet better and their goals, that the world does better when we love our neighbors, who are the weakest, who may be the poorest and the sickest, with our resources, and when we love them with our time, when we invest in them, the results are tangible. I just have a couple of the goals that they managed to reach. One of them was to cut those who are living in extreme poverty in half from 1990 till now. People who lived on less than $1.25 a day, they wanted to cut that in half. That seems crazy in 25 years. And they did it. We are down by 1 billion people on the planet who are living in that kind of poverty. They wanted to attempt to cut hunger in half, and they almost got there. In 1990, 23% of people in the developing world were undernourished. That number is now down to 13%. Loving our neighbor can work wonders, or what we might call it in this place, miracles. And we get opportunities to do this, to love our neighbor, to make a difference all the time. It happened just this week, right before our staff meeting. We had a gentleman in a wheelchair and his wife come into the office. They needed a ride back to Preston Highway in Louisville. They had actually been in Bible study across the street, where that group had very generously collected money for them for a need that they had. And before they went home, they went to the gas station to use the bathroom. And while he was in there, probably with the help of his wife, someone stole their money. When we learned about it, Dave's response was, "What kind of neighbor is that?" We were so thankful they made their way to us. Milana called the TARC 3 to come pick them up. Paid with the church card. Dave found some money for them for the road and found them some to eat from actually our nursery snack stash. Because don't tell Jenny. Only because our food pantry had already been cleaned out and taken to the Center for Lay Ministries. And right now, the children in junior worship are creating snack bags that we can give away in just those situations so that we're prepared. And encounters like those remind us that there's no doubt that Jeffersonville needs churches. Churches like the ones across the street that collected the money, churches like ours to help when the money gets stolen, when people are not treated like people, let alone like neighbors. We have seen this all over the world and all over the news on an epic scale with the migrant crisis in Europe and at our own borders. And we hope that our own shock and dismay at this will cause a renewed sense of hospitality, of seeing all children as our children. Jesus was constantly trying to help those around him expand their idea of what he meant when he would say the word neighbor. He wanted to expand it to include Samaritan, women, crippled, the blind, the tax collector, the fisherman, the Pharisee. And he tried with his own life to show what that kind of neighborly love really looked like. He spoke to them with mercy and also in truth. He ate meals with them. He accepted their hospitality. He physically touched them and listened and learned from them, and was ultimately willing to give his life for them. Now, each of us has a list in our own head of who is our neighbor, who maybe we don't want to be our neighbor. And here's the secret part. When we make that list and we get the person in our head, we're like, yeah, no, I don't really want them to be my neighbor. Jesus' immediate response is they go to the front of the line and they get the way better seat than you. Like, that's what I always think of when Jesus is like, oh, yeah, no. And I'm sitting them next to you, and you're going to love them. He wanted the people of his own time and our time to struggle with that idea of why we ever limit our care or love for other children of God, no matter what age, by understanding again that we are all children of God, that no one is excluded. And in these commandments, Jesus just says to do it. Jesus does not say, this will be easy. Jesus does not say this will be without sacrifice. And one of the best people I know to quote on being a good neighbor was a wise Presbyterian pastor named Mr. Rogers, who put it like this, which my quote's a little different than that one. I'm not sure how they didn't match up, but love isn't a state of perfect caring. It is an active verb like struggle. To love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly the way he or she is, right here and now. So in practical terms, how do we live out that struggle? And what in the world does that have to do with stewardship? Well, I think that the ways we give ourselves away through time and talent and treasure fundamentally shapes how we are able to love other people. And if this does not come naturally to you, or this is a new idea to you, you are so in the right church that the people in these pews are great at this and at teaching it. I will admit, as an only child and an only grandchild who maybe received an overabundance of attention, I'll tell you that learning how to be other-focused, how to be outwardly focused, continues to be a lifelong struggle for me. But being with all of you and watching you give yourselves away again and again has allowed me to see that up close. And just to give you an idea, I took down some of the answers people shared on our cards for the ways they have given away their talents and their treasures. And these are just the organizations that are touched by First Christian Church Jeffersonville's treasure. Ready? The Animal Shelter, the Home of the Innocents, Exit Zero, Cozair, United Way, Goodwill, Red Cross, Week of Compassion, the Alzheimer's Association, the American Cancer Society, Lexington Theological Seminary, IUS, Clark County Youth Center, Donors Choose, Water.org, Operation Christmas Child, and women's shelters. Inside the church, we've helped fund the mission trip, Loaves and Fishes, Vacation Bible School, Christmas baskets, Angel Tree, Clothe the Child, and scholarships. This doesn't even count the ways that we have given to individuals who may have needed help with bills, food, and a variety of assistance. And our talents have been given away just in this past year to Vacation Bible School, to junior worship, to leading and participating in studies, art, cooking, quilting, praying, playing, and singing and leading the band and/or choir, by coaching, by preparing communion, by being an elder or deacon, by leading a team or participating on a team, by counseling or writing articles, by attending worship, by being open-minded, by helping in the office and giving to the Center for Lay Ministries. And here's even better news. That's just a sampling of the cards. And the cards are only this small percentage of what we do. And it's only a small percentage of what we are capable of doing in this church, in this community, and for the world. We are engaged in that struggle that Mr. Rogers spoke about. The struggle that Jesus himself calls us to engage in together. So is there anything that stops that from happening, from making that harder, or why we don't just do a little bit more than what we're already doing? And I always think it's safe just to go back to see what Jesus said, to check in with him. And what he says and what most major religions say is the one most of us know: you must love your neighbor as yourself. We've talked about the neighbor part. But it also means we must be good at loving ourselves too. And on the surface, that sounds like such a simple idea. Just love yourself. But then it just takes one trip through the magazine aisle at the bookstore or the Kroger's. Between the books, the magazines, the books, the TV shows, and the diet programs, why do they need to tell us all these ways to fix ourselves if we're already good at loving ourselves? Just the men's magazines alone, the men's health ones alone, apparently men and their abdominal muscles is a serious problem. I don't know, just that alone. But all these things tell us that we need help, that we can't just love ourselves. We need help with our bodies and our homes and our gardens and our children and our cooking and our parenting and our crafting. We need help to relax and we need help to get energy. We need to sleep better, but we also need to work harder. That despite being such a rich country, we are often so poor in self-worth and esteem if we're honest with ourselves. That we are often looking at our neighbors to make sure that we're keeping up, or at least not falling behind. And if we are falling behind, we feel terrible about it. I think this can also, at least this is true for me, this can feel this way about doing service as well. We'll start to think, oh, I'm not doing enough, or I'm not doing it the right way, or the service I am doing, people aren't supporting it the way I want them to, or I'm not supporting them the right way. And we're worried, ultimately, as my friend, my writing partner told me this, she said, we're worried that we are goats and everybody else is the sheep. This story, if you're not familiar with it, happens just a few chapters after the one we read today. There's a parable that Jesus tells about a king who rewards the sheep because they were the ones feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and visiting the sick and comforting the imprisoned, while the goats do not get the good end of the deal. That they ignored the needs in the world, that they ignored their neighbors. The commandments that we heard today that Jesus gives to the lawyer, they're our road to being sheep. And I can't soft pedal it. They're not suggestions, they're not slight nudges. I can't get around them in my daily life. They are the two greatest commandments. All the prophets and the laws hang upon them. Which sounds scary until you remember that all the prophets and all the laws, they hang upon acts of love. That's the best kind of command there is. I remember towards the end of his life, my papa would talk, and he was always worried about this judgment that was going to happen, which made no sense to me. He had been generous his whole life. He had spent much of his life in service, but he just wasn't sure when it really came down to it if he was going to measure up. And I will be honest with you, that makes me very nervous, because if he's not getting in, I am in huge trouble. In those scenarios, when we worry about those things, the worst possible judge that could be there would be ourselves. For many of us, no one can be as harsh as a critic as we are. But here's the best news. In fact, it is the good news of salvation. We are not the judge. We are not the king in that situation. Jesus is. The author Jen Hatmaker tells a great story about this and about her kids. Apparently, they're at the age they're about to enter into high school, and although she is sure that her children will be perfect angels every single day, just in case, she admits she has an ace up her sleeve, and that is her mother is the high school principal. Principal King is also known as Grandma. They will face the music, her children, but they will also find mercy because they are her babies. And Jen goes on to say, having Jesus as judge, like we see in Matthew 25, is something akin to having your Grandma double as your principal. No one loves you more than Jesus. No one is more on your side. No one is more obsessed with his sons and daughters. No one else laid down his life for you. It's like walking into court and finding out your best friend is hearing the case. Because your judge also goes by the name friend. His justice is constructed on mercy. And we will never stand before a judge more determined to bring about our liberation. So may we love our church, and may we love our God with all our hearts and with all our soul and minds. May we choose every day to love our neighbor and also choose to love ourselves, because Jesus loves us so very much.